Welcome back, everyone. If you've ever worked for years towards something you believed was finally about to happen, only to have everything change in a single moment, share your experience in the comments. And before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. My name is Laura Bennett, and for years, I believed consistency and hard work would eventually lead somewhere meaningful. I worked at an IT firm where things were rarely simple. Systems went down without warning, deadlines shifted overnight, and problems had to be solved fast. I found my place in that kind of environment. I liked figuring things out. I liked being the person people turned to when something stopped working and no one else knew what to do. I didn't start with a big role or a clear path. I learned slowly, one project at a time, picking up skills wherever I could. Over the years, more responsibility started finding its way to me. Not through titles or announcements, just through trust. I became someone leadership depended on without ever saying it directly. For the first time, it felt like all of that effort was leading to something. I just didn't know that less than a day before everything changed, my life was about to shift in a way I never expected. When I first joined the company, I didn't imagine I would stay as long as I did. It started as just another job, something stable while I figured out my long-term direction. But over time, the work became familiar, and the people around me started to feel like a team I could depend on. I learned the systems inside and out, slowly becoming the person others asked when something went wrong. The IT department was always under pressure. Servers failed, updates broke things, and clients expected fast answers. I found myself stepping in more often, staying late to make sure problems were solved before morning. It wasn't something I was asked to do. I just didn't like leaving things unfinished. Little by little, my name started coming up in meetings. If something needed attention, I was included. If a project was struggling, I was brought in to help stabilize it. It wasn't loud or obvious. No big recognition. Just quiet trust building over time. Then one day, I heard something that stayed with me. Someone mentioned that leadership was preparing changes across several teams. I didn't think much of it at the time. But that was the first moment something started shifting. Over the next few months, the changes became more noticeable. New leadership started appearing more often. There were more private meetings and longer conversations behind closed doors. The atmosphere in the office felt slightly different, like something was quietly building in the background. At the same time, I was being trusted with bigger responsibilities. I was given access to systems I hadn't worked on before. I was asked to review projects that were already in progress. My manager began looping me into conversations that used to happen without me. It felt like a step forward, even though no one said it directly. Coworkers started joking that I was becoming the go-to person for everything. I laughed it off, but part of me noticed the pattern. I was being included more, trusted more, relied on more. One afternoon, I overheard two people talking near the break room. They were discussing an internal announcement expected soon. Something about leadership shifts and new roles opening up. I didn't think my name would be part of that. But for the first time, I wondered if it might be. At first, I tried not to think too much about what I overheard. Office rumors were common, and most of them never led to anything real. Still, something about the way people spoke in lower voices and stopped conversations when others walked by made it feel different this time. It wasn't just casual talk. It felt like decisions were already being made somewhere above us. I noticed my manager watching me more closely during meetings. Not in a bad way, just more aware. He started asking for my input on things he usually handled alone. When systems slowed down or a project needed quick fixes, I was the first person he called. It felt like a quiet shift. One afternoon, he asked me to review a rollout plan with him. We spent nearly 2 hours going over details, adjusting timelines, and making sure everything would hold up under pressure. When we finished, he nodded slowly and said, "Good work. You're handling a lot better than most people would." That stayed with me. For the first time, I allowed myself to think maybe I was moving toward something bigger. Later that week, I noticed a calendar invite pop up for a company-wide meeting scheduled the following month. The subject line was simple: leadership announcement. The closer that meeting got, the more the office energy shifted. People were more alert, conversations were shorter, and there was a constant feeling that something important was right around the corner. No one said anything directly, but it was obvious that something was changing behind the scenes. At the same time, I found myself taking on even more responsibility. Projects that used to be handled by entire teams were now landing on my desk. I didn't complain. I just worked through them the same way I always had. Long evenings, problem solving, and making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. It felt normal by then. One evening, after staying late to finish a system check, I noticed my manager still in his office. The lights were dim, and he was on the phone, speaking quietly. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard one sentence as I walked past. "We'll finalize it tomorrow." He stopped talking when he noticed me and gave a quick nod. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. Something about the moment stayed with me. For the first time, I started to feel a strange mix of excitement and unease. Like something important was about to happen, but I wasn't sure how it would affect me. Over the next few days, the workload didn't slow down. If anything, it picked up even more. I was handling system checks, troubleshooting urgent issues, and reviewing updates across multiple departments. It felt like everything important was suddenly moving through me. At first, I didn't question it. I was used to being the one who stepped in when things got busy. But this felt different. There was a sense of urgency I couldn't quite explain. My manager kept stopping by my desk to ask for quick updates. He didn't stay long. Just enough to check where things stood, then he would walk away, already focused on something else. One afternoon, after I finished resolving a server issue that had been causing problems for days, he came over and stood beside my desk. "That was handled well," he said quietly. Not many people could have pulled that off so quickly. I thanked him, surprised by the direct praise. He didn't say much else, just nodded and returned to his office. It should have felt like a good moment. But something about his tone felt tense, almost distracted. As if he had something on his mind he wasn't saying out loud. The week before the company-wide meeting, the atmosphere grew noticeably heavier. Conversations dropped to low voices. People seemed more focused, more cautious. There was a sense that something important had already been decided, and everyone was just waiting for it to be revealed. I tried to stay focused on my work. Late one afternoon, I was called into my manager's office to go over a project update. We sat across from each other, reviewing details and timelines. It felt normal at first, just another routine discussion. But I noticed he seemed restless. He kept glancing at his computer screen, then back at the documents in front of him. His responses were shorter than usual. At one point, he stopped mid-sentence and leaned back in his chair, like he was trying to think through something. "You've been doing solid work," he said after a moment. "Keep it up." I thanked him, but the way he said it felt strange. Not proud. Not encouraging. Just careful. And for the first time, I felt like something important was happening around me, but I wasn't being told the full story. The night before the company-wide meeting, I stayed late finishing up a final system check. It had become a habit by then. I liked knowing things were stable before leaving. The office was nearly empty, just the low hum of computers and the soft glow of desk lamps. It felt calm in a way it rarely did during the day. As I was packing up to leave, I noticed my manager still in his office. The door was slightly open, and I could see him pacing while talking on the phone. His voice was low, too quiet to make out full sentences, but I caught a few words as I walked past. "Tomorrow morning, before the announcement." I slowed for a second without meaning to. Then he noticed me and stopped speaking. He turned slightly, lowered his voice even more, and closed the door halfway. I kept walking, telling myself it was none of my business. But the moment stayed with me. Before the announcement. Something about the way he said it didn't sound excited. It sounded tense. Almost rushed. For the first time, a small knot of unease settled in my chest. The next morning started like any other. I arrived early, set my bag down, and turned on my computer. The office felt unusually quiet. People were at their desks, but there was less conversation than usual. Everyone seemed focused, like they were waiting for something. I was checking through overnight reports when I noticed my manager walking toward me. "Laura, can you come with me for a minute?" he asked. His voice was calm, but something about his expression made my stomach tighten. I followed him down the hallway, past rows of desks and into one of the smaller meeting rooms. When I stepped inside, HR was already sitting at the table with a folder in front of her. My heart started beating faster. This wasn't what I expected. I took a seat slowly, glancing between them, trying to understand what was happening. My manager didn't meet my eyes right away. He stood for a moment, then finally sat down beside HR. The room felt too quiet. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about the announcement at all. HR opened the folder slowly, like she had done this many times before. "Laura, thank you for coming in," she said, her voice calm and professional. I nodded, trying to keep my hands steady in my lap. My manager still wasn't looking at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the table, his expression tight. The silence stretched for a few seconds before HR continued. "We've made the decision to end your employment effective immediately," she said. For a moment, the words didn't register. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. "End your employment. Effective immediately." It felt distant, like she was talking about someone else. I don't understand," I said quietly. "Did something happen?" HR shook her head. "This decision is tied to a role realignment connected to a leadership transition." The phrase sounded official. Final. Carefully chosen. I turned toward my manager, waiting for something more. An explanation. A reason. Anything. But he only nodded slightly, still avoiding my eyes. "This isn't about your performance," HR added. "You've done strong work here." The words felt hollow. Because none of it explained why this was happening now. I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest felt tight. "Can you explain what this means?" I asked carefully. "I've been handling multiple projects. Everything is stable." "Why now?" HR glanced briefly at my manager before responding. "The organization is adjusting reporting structures as part of the leadership transition," she said. "Your position no longer fits within the updated structure." The answer felt rehearsed. Like something said to close a conversation, not open one. I looked at my manager again. This time, he finally met my eyes, but only for a second. There was something there I couldn't quite read. Not anger. Not coldness. Nervousness. Then he looked away again. That small moment stuck with me more than anything else. If this was just a standard decision, why did he look so uncomfortable? HR slid a paper across the table, explaining final pay and transition details. The conversation moved quickly after that, like they were trying to get through it as fast as possible. Within minutes, it was over. And just like that, after years of work, I was being asked to leave. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. HR spoke calmly, explaining final pay, unused vacation days, and how access to company systems would be closed by the end of the day. I nodded when expected, but the words barely reached me. My mind kept circling the same question. Why now? 10 minutes earlier, I had been sitting at my desk checking system reports. Now I was being told to clear out and leave. The shift felt too sudden, too sharp. When I stood up, my manager stood too, but he didn't say much. Just a quiet, "Thank you for everything you've done." It sounded polite, careful, almost distant. I followed HR back down the hallway. People were working as usual, unaware that anything had changed. The normal sounds of keyboards and quiet conversations made everything feel even more unreal. I reached my desk and picked up my bag. I didn't have much there. Just a notebook, my phone charger, and a few small personal items I kept tucked in the corner. No announcement. No goodbyes. Just a quiet exit. As I walked toward the door, I glanced back once. My manager was standing near the end of the hallway, watching. And when our eyes met, he quickly looked away. The drive home felt longer than usual. I kept both hands on the wheel, replaying the meeting again and again. The words. The tone. The way everything seemed already decided before I even walked into that room. It didn't feel like something that happened overnight. It felt planned. But the timing still didn't make sense. The company-wide meeting was scheduled for later that day. Leadership announcements. New roles. Changes. I had spent weeks helping stabilize projects, making sure systems were ready for whatever came next. And now I was gone just hours before it happened. At home, I set my bag down by the door and sat in silence. The quiet felt heavy. My mind kept drifting back to the look on my manager's face. He hadn't looked relieved. He looked tense, almost worried. I tried to push the thought away. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe this really was just part of the company shifting into something new. But deep down, something didn't feel right. The timing felt too exact. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been moved out of the way for a reason I still didn't understand. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. The house was quiet, but my thoughts wouldn't settle. I kept replaying the last few weeks in my head, searching for something I might have missed. Every conversation, every late night, every project I had worked on leading up to this moment. Everything had felt normal. More than normal, actually. I had been trusted with bigger responsibilities than ever before. Systems that were considered critical were suddenly under my supervision. I had been brought into conversations that used to happen without me. None of that felt like preparation for letting me go. If anything, it felt like the opposite. I stood up and paced slowly, trying to make sense of it. Maybe the leadership transition really did change everything. Maybe new people wanted their own teams. It was the only explanation that sounded logical. Still, something about my manager's behavior kept coming back to me. The way he avoided eye contact. The way he looked tense. The way he rushed through the meeting. It didn't feel like someone calmly delivering a routine decision. It felt like someone who had already made up his mind about something. And that thought wouldn't leave me alone. Later that afternoon, I checked my phone out of habit. A few messages had come in from coworkers. Short ones. Simple ones. Hey, heard you left. Hope you're okay. Didn't expect that. Take care. None of them knew what had happened. Or maybe they only knew what they'd been told. I typed back polite responses, not wanting to explain anything yet. I wasn't even sure how to explain it to myself. Then one message stood out. It was from someone in another department I worked closely with on projects. Are you free to talk? It read. I hesitated for a moment, then replied yes. The call came almost immediately. Laura, I just heard, they said, their voice confused. I didn't even know you were leaving. I didn't know either, I answered quietly. There was a pause on the line. Then they said something that made my chest tighten. Did you know they're making a big announcement today? I didn't respond right away. Because suddenly, the timing felt even stranger than before. I gripped the phone a little tighter. What kind of announcement? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They're restructuring leadership across departments, they said. New roles, new reporting lines. Everyone's been talking about it all week. I swallowed slowly. I already knew about the meeting. I just hadn't expected to be on the outside when it happened. I was told this morning, I said quietly. They ended my role. There was silence on the other end. Wait, what? They finally said. That doesn't make sense. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what to say. I thought you were part of the changes, they continued. You've been handling so much lately. People assumed you were moving up, not leaving. The words hit harder than I expected. Moving up. That was the first time anyone had said it out loud. I tried to brush it off. I guess plans changed. But even as I said it, it didn't feel true. Nothing about the last few weeks looked like preparation for letting me go. It looked like preparation for something else. After the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone. Moving up. The phrase kept repeating in my head. I thought back to the projects I'd been given recently. The access I'd been granted to systems I'd never worked with before. The way my manager started involving me in discussions that used to happen without me. It hadn't felt random at the time. It felt like trust. And now I was suddenly gone the same day leadership changes were being announced. I tried to shake the thought away, but it kept returning. What if I had misunderstood everything? Or worse, what if I hadn't misunderstood at all? I stood up and started pacing again, my mind racing through every conversation I'd had over the past month. Every late night. Every extra responsibility. Every moment that felt like I was being pulled into something bigger. Then I stopped. The announcement. It was happening today. And I wasn't there to see it. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. I tried to distract myself by doing small things around the house, but my mind kept drifting back to the office. I kept picturing the meeting room filling up. People taking their seats. Leadership standing at the front, preparing to speak. I wondered what was being said. What roles were changing? Who was being promoted? Who was moving into new positions? And where I would have fit into all of it if I had still been there. By early evening, my phone buzzed again. It was the same coworker who had called earlier. I answered quickly. "It's over," they said. They finished the announcement. I stayed quiet, waiting. They named new leads for several departments. Some reporting lines changed. It looks like a big shift. I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. "That makes sense," I said softly. There was a pause on the line. Then they added, "There was something else." My chest tightened slightly. "What do you mean?" I asked. "They mentioned a promotion tied to the transition," they continued slowly. "A new senior role to help stabilize the tech side of things." I felt my breath catch. "That sounds like a big position," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It is," they replied. "It's one of the biggest changes they announced." I swallowed, unsure why my heart was suddenly racing. "Who got it?" I asked. There was a brief silence. "That's the strange part," they said. They didn't explain everything clearly. They just said the role was already decided and would be finalized soon. I frowned slightly. "Finalized soon?" I repeated. "Yeah," they said. Like it was already planned ahead of time. I leaned back in my chair, my thoughts moving faster now. Already planned. Before today. Before the meeting. Before I was told to leave. For the first time, the unease in my chest grew stronger. Because it felt like something important had been set in motion long before I walked into that room that morning. After the call ended, I sat there in silence, replaying every word. Already planned. The phrase echoed in my head. If that role had been decided ahead of time, then leadership had been preparing for this transition for weeks, maybe even months. And during that time, I had been given more responsibility than ever. Access to systems I hadn't worked with before. Input on projects that usually stayed at higher levels. It didn't feel like a coincidence. I stood up and walked slowly across the room, trying to think clearly. My manager's behavior over the past few weeks came back to me in pieces. The way he watched me more closely. The way he kept pulling me into conversations, then suddenly stopping mid-thought like he was holding something back. Then there was the night before the meeting. Before the announcement. He had said those words on the phone. And the next morning, I was gone. The connection was starting to form, even though I didn't want to believe it yet. Because if that role had already been decided, then someone had known exactly what was about to happen. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through old messages, trying to ground myself. Nothing looked unusual on the surface. Just project updates, system checks, and small conversations about deadlines. But now, everything felt different when I looked at it again. I remembered the extra hours I'd spent reviewing plans with my manager. The way he kept asking for my opinion on decisions he normally made alone. The way he seemed restless, distracted, like he was thinking 2 steps ahead of every conversation. And then the meeting that morning. The speed of it. The way HR moved through the explanation without much discussion. The way my manager barely spoke. It hadn't felt like a long process. It felt quick. Almost urgent. I stopped scrolling and set the phone down, a heavy realization starting to settle in. If that promotion had already been decided before the announcement, then my leaving that morning hadn't been random timing. It had happened right before something important was made official. That thought stayed with me the rest of the night. I tried to push it away, telling myself I was overthinking. But the more I replayed everything in my head, the harder it became to ignore the pattern. The extra responsibilities. The sudden trust. The way my manager had been acting in the final days leading up to the announcement. None of it felt accidental anymore. It felt like I had been moving towards something. And then, just before it happened, I was gone. I sat on the couch staring at my phone, wondering if I would ever really understand what had taken place. Maybe it was just timing. Maybe I had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Then my phone started ringing. An unknown number. For a second, I hesitated. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something told me to answer. "Hello." "Laura," a calm voice said on the other end. "This is from corporate. Are you available to talk right now?" My heart started beating faster. Corporate? That wasn't something I expected to hear. and the tone in their voice sounded urgent. "Yes, I'm here," I replied, sitting up straight. There was a brief pause before the person spoke again. "We need to confirm something quickly," they said. "Were you informed today that your employment had been terminated?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes," I said slowly. "This morning." There was another pause. This one longer. "That's unexpected," they said carefully. I frowned, gripping the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" "We're reviewing a few internal details related to today's leadership transition," they continued. "And your name is still listed in an active leadership appointment file." My chest tightened. "Leadership appointment?" I repeated. "Yes," they said. "According to our records, you were scheduled to move into a senior role as part of today's announcement." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I felt the room go completely still around me. "Laura," the voice continued, more serious now. "We need to understand who authorized your termination." And in that moment, I knew something had gone very wrong. I felt my hand tighten around the phone. "I was told it was part of a role realignment tied to the leadership transition," I said, my voice unsteady. HR and my manager were both in the room. There was silence for a moment on the other end, followed by the sound of someone quietly exhaling. "That decision didn't come from us," the voice said carefully. "No executive approval was recorded for your termination." My heart started pounding. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means your name was formally approved for a promotion weeks ago," they replied. "Your appointment was scheduled to be announced today. No one at the board level was aware you had been let go this morning." I stood up slowly, my mind racing. "Then why was I fired?" I whispered. "We're trying to understand that right now," they said. "A member of the board personally recognized your work during a private review. Your promotion had strong internal support." That was when it hit me. My manager had known. And he had acted before the announcement could make it official. Everything moved quickly after that. Within minutes, I was asked to come back to the office immediately. The announcement was still being finalized, and they needed to correct what had happened before it became public. My hands were still shaking as I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. When I arrived, the atmosphere inside felt completely different from the way I had left it that morning. People were moving fast. Voices were low but urgent. I was guided straight into a conference room where senior leadership was waiting. The same people who had been part of the leadership transition now looked concerned, focused. One of them explained quietly that my termination had been initiated at the managerial level without proper authorization. Another added that a board member had personally spoken about my contributions months earlier, calling me a key reason several critical projects had succeeded. My manager hadn't known that. He hadn't known I already had support at the highest level. By the end of that meeting, he was placed under investigation and temporarily suspended. And later that day, the announcement went out. This time, I was still there. And my name was called for the promotion he had tried to take away.